Welcome to Levels of Connection, where we discuss how human connections work and why they're so important. Welcome to Levels of Connection. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Line Hilton, who is a vocal performance and mindset coach. I love the way that Lynn describes her journey with connecting throughout her life and how we connect differently in the different decades of our life as we grow older and more experienced. Also, another really interesting point is around how limiting beliefs play a key role in the way that we communicate and the way that we connect. Really interesting experience, a lot of insights, a lot of sharing of tools and methodologies. Enjoy. Welcome, Lynn Hilton.
Hello, lovely to see you, Stephanos.
Great to see you again, Lynn. And your episode number 7, 007.
Mm,
So I should call you Hilton, Lynn Hilton, right?
great.
So, Lynn, to introduce you to our audience, you're a vocal performance and mindset coach, and much more than that. Do you want to talk to us briefly about your professional career and what you do right now, and then we can dive right into it?
Yeah, so I guess I have what many people call these days a portfolio career. So I was always involved in music from a very young age, but decided to take a sensible path and chose nursing as my first career. So I trained as a general nurse and worked in a variety of different settings, from general wards through to acute wards such as coronary care. And then it also took me into occupational health, which introduced me to the corporate world and then eventually film and television. But I had always really wanted to be a vocalist, a singer, and it just never really occurred to me that I could make a career out of it. And sometime later in my 20s, I started getting back into music and realized that actually this is where my heart lay. And so progressively, I switched over into being a performer. And I was a jazz vocalist for probably just over a decade. Studied, went back to university, did a degree in music education, and then performed in different places in Australia, the UK, a little bit in the US, lived in New York for some time. And I was there during 9/11, actually. And it was in that moment that I really had to think a little bit more about what I wanted to do with my life and whether performance was really the direction I wanted to go in.
Mm.
Because being a solo jazz vocalist, it's hard work. And I was already teaching, doing singing lessons at that time, because that's quite a common thing for musicians to do. And I realized that actually I had a huge passion for teaching and helping other people become singing teachers. Interestingly, I was pursuing the performance side and thinking this is where I wanted to go as a jazz vocalist, touring the world, doing festivals and things like that. And I was in New York for a year, living the artist's life. And it happened to be 9/11, the time that I was there. And it made me stop really to readdress the direction that I was going in and whether it was what I really wanted. And I'd already started teaching by this stage, which is very common for gigging musicians. They'll do some teaching to supplement their income. And I realized actually that I loved teaching. I just loved teaching. And I spent quite a bit of time sitting and watching other singers. Instead of thinking, oh, I could do that better and I should have this gig, I was thinking, oh, I think I could help their voice and I could help them sing that better. And I realized that actually this was the direction I wanted to go in. And so I became solely a singing teacher and performance coach. And then I had the opportunity to bring my medical background into everything else I was doing. And I did a master's in performing arts medicine, which is like sports medicine, but for performers. And so now I focus a little bit more on that side, in particular the mindset aspect, because I work with people who are perfectly capable, technically able, and have no reason why they can't go out and do what they do, but they just lack the confidence. And so I
Mm.
realized that actually, if I can work on that side of things, the rest is a little easier, because it isn't really the technique or the experience that's causing someone to hold themselves back. It's what's going on in their mind.
And I know that you work with people who are not performers as well. In the business world, the corporate world. I mean, you worked with me for a period of 3 to 6 months actually on my presentation on my confidence on creating videos. So,
Mhm.
and I'm coming from the corporate side of things. So you bridge that, and also thinking about it, performing, especially when you're in a, you're presenting, you're pitching something. So what's the difference between a performer in the corporate side of things and then the performing arts? What's your experience been?
Well, I don't know if it's hugely different in terms of you're communicating, you're connecting. So obviously, if you're a performer on stage, you're connecting with a mass. And to be honest, some people find that easier to do than one to one or in small groups. But ultimately, you're communicating a message, and there are different ways that you might approach it if you're in a setting where there's a group of people as opposed to one to one. And certainly you can be more personalized one to one, but you still need to have the confidence to do
Mm.
what you're doing. And I think also audiences, just like individuals, can pick up when someone's not authentic. Though they may be more forgiving when you're an entertainer because they might be coming to see you because you're entertaining them in some reason, for some reason, or in some way. Whereas when you're communicating with someone on an individual level, you're probably more likely to be yourself or want to be yourself, and to make a connection to see wherever that will go, whether that's as a business or a friendship or a relationship or whatever it is.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the presenting or the performing in front of large groups of people versus the one to one or one to a small group of people. Talk to me a little bit about that and your experience, being a performer and performing in front of a large audience. How was the connection then and in that moment versus now that you're working with either one to one or a small group of people?
Mm. I think it depends in the context of who you are as the performer. Are you performing as someone else, as a character? Because I sometimes work with people who work in the musical theatre or who are actors, where they're being someone else, in which case you have what's called like the fourth wall up. So it's almost like you're in a room by yourself, being who your character is, and you're not connecting with the audience. So you can definitely do that. And whereas I think if you're doing that one to one, that would hinder communication. Having said that, if you're an artist as a performer, so you're the singer songwriter, or you're representing yourself in some way, performing the songs, then you do want to bring down that fourth wall and connect. And it can seem daunting because there's so many people there. But actually, I usually work with performers just in that context and say, just think about connecting with one person. Just think about the person who really needs this message that you're giving through the song or through your tour or through your brand. And think about that one person and just connecting with them. I think it's very similar when you're writing blogs, is that you're not thinking about connecting with absolutely everyone that might read that blog, but you're connecting
Mm.
with a person who's going to need that message. And the other thing is to recognize that people will interpret your message their own way. I mean, that happens no matter what kind of communication or setting you're in. And it doesn't actually mean anything about you if they don't take the message the way that you intended it to, but it can still be really impactful. And I can remember, a woman coming up to me after a gig saying, "Oh, that song you sang, it was so amazing and it made me cry." And it's the sort of song that actually made me always feel happy. And I was quite shocked. And then I thought, well, but that's her experience. That doesn't mean I did something bad. Because I first of all went, "Oh, I'm really sorry," and apologized. She goes, "No, it was beautiful." And then I just realized, oh, well, people take things very differently. And I don't know what it was in that song that she connected with that made her want to cry, but that was her personal experience. And it isn't my job as the performer to force somebody to feel what I do about the message or the song or the lyrics. The other thing is that, and this is something that quite often performers will tell you, it's a lot easier to just look at it, the people as a sea of beings. And in fact, they'll make quite a concerted effort not to have eye contact. You might get told sometimes if you're working with a group of people and you're looking out into the audience, stare at their forehead, just sort of above their eyes. Don't look into their eyes because that can sometimes put the performer off. But I actually found, especially because of the kind of most of the types of settings that I used to perform in, that I did like to connect individually with people occasionally, eye to eye contact. But you do have to have confidence to do that.
What was the process that that you followed to get to that confidence?
I don't know if I did any process. I think I practiced it. I mean, now that when I work with people who are working on, say, performance anxiety, because they've got to go and do a presentation or a performance in front of, a group of people and they're starting to feel nervous about it, we might actually do some desensitization exercises where they'll put out chairs in a row and they might put little dolls or teddy bears or images like, some sort of photo of people. Start to practice this idea of being in front of us, more than one person or more than a couple of people, and get used to this idea. And quite often I'll say, put someone in the audience that you really would be very anxious about performing in front of. That might be a relative, or it might be a certain person like, a Sam Cowell, a Simon Cowell type person. But so that you can sort of desensitize. The other thing too is to focus on the message. And I think that's what I did, was like I was focusing much more on, well, what's the message of this song? How do I want the person to feel when they hear me sing this song and hear the lyrics and hear the music? And that helped me to disconnect a little bit, I suppose, or distance myself from that more personal feeling. Yeah, there are definitely, and it's something that you actually mentioned, a lot of performers, when they use their voice, have a huge issue with their own voice and hearing it externally.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember when we start.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the first things that I mentioned to you, that I was feeling very odd about listening to the sound of my own voice on the recordings that I was doing. I just couldn't. It took me a few sessions to get over that, and the work that we did together.
Yeah, because what you hear externally is quite different to what you hear internally. When you think about the acoustics and where the voice is coming from. So people quite often have never heard their voice externally, and it sounds to them really foreign, maybe unattractive, and certainly doesn't sound like their voice because they've been used to listening to their voice internally.
And
So a
how
lot of
much
performers have that problem as well.
and how much that can hold us back from reaching out and connecting to other people once once you face it and you get over it, or you practice, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes, you
um
practice and desensitize yourself. So,
mm,
like, I mean, I'm not sure how it happened for you, but after a point in time, you weren't listening to your voice in that critical way anymore.
yeah.
You, I mean, I still listen to my voice to find out, do I like, my intonation? Am I, is my pacing correct? Is there something else I could do with the rhythm? All of those things, but I'm not sitting there being self-critical. But
mm,
quite a lot of performers, they're very conscious of the fact that, oh, now I'm in front of all these people, they're going to be hearing this. And if they haven't come to terms with their voice, it might be part of one of the things that holds them back.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank God you're there to help them, right? So, but you mentioned earlier about the different ways of interpreting, the different ways different people in the audience connect with the messages or the performance, and talking about interpretation and different ways of connecting. You were born and you grew up in Australia. You lived in the US. You lived in Switzerland. And you've been living in the UK. Your father from the UK, your mother from Switzerland. So there's so many different ways. I mean, you've worked in different companies and organizations with different backgrounds and different cultures. That's a sea of different possibilities of connecting methodologies. What's the and A lot of opportunities to mess up your communications and your connections. What was the worst, what is the worst connections that you've had maybe throughout these different, diverse countries and careers that you've had?
Well, it was really interesting because as a nurse, obviously, I got to connect with lots of different cultures. Even in Australia in particular, there's a lot of different cultures living in Australia because we're a very immigrant country. And then living in these different countries and being in a family of different cultures. So I feel like there's 4 different cultures in my family. There's my mum who's Swiss, my dad who's very British, sort of stiff upper lip, my brother who's so Aussie, and then me who's a little bit more international, and trying to mediate between all of them. And yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I had a few life lessons along the way when I got into nursing, especially in the days when I was doing my training. We would get clinically analysed and criticised. I can remember being told that I needed to smile more, and that another one was that I shouldn't talk too much to the patients, or that wasn't just me, that was a general thing, or that you couldn't communicate directly with certain people, like you couldn't communicate directly with the doctor. You had to tell the charge nurse first of all,
Mm,
and even if the doctor was standing there. So you learnt very quickly as a nurse that communication and connection had a hierarchy to it, and
mm,
as student nurses, we were pretty low on that hierarchy. So that was interesting to me. I'd never thought of it in that way before. And then communicating with different cultures. I've worked in some cultures where they work very differently to the Western medicine culture, and uh, it created a lot of miscommunication, and for me ended up causing me to leave because I felt like I couldn't do my job properly, because I couldn't talk directly about the issues that were going on. And whereas my mother was known as very direct, and I was also kind of known as direct, which is a little bit Australian. I think Australians and Americans tend to be quite direct. I remember when I started talking about communication and teaching about it, encountering Edward Hall, who came up with this cultural framework theory in terms of the way that different cultures communicate, some being more what he calls high context, and some being more low context. So if you're much more like in the Swiss or German or Scandinavian arena, you're much more explicit. And if you're much more in the Japanese, Chinese arena of the spectrum, then you're more in what's called the low context culture, which is more implicit, and might use more in tone, might use more with gestures as opposed to being more direct. And definitely when I was in America, I noticed that.
How have you managed your, since you're more high context, how did you manage the communication or the connections with the people that identified more with the low context way of communicating?
Yeah, so I've found that here in the UK, certainly down south, it's probably more low context, and I had to adapt. I did, because I mean, you know, I was seen as way too direct. I can't say I got sacked from a job, but basically I had a job where I was on probation, you know, that 3-month probation. Didn't continue. And the reason given was because I had upset a client by being very too direct, and they'd complained. And I was like, what? you know, that's something that's sackable, or, you know, would cause me not to continue my.
So they didn't provide you that feedback directly. They just so you didn't know that you were improper, quote unquote.
No. And fortunately, I didn't get an opportunity to go and apologize either. So I didn't know that client, and I didn't know the context. And I'm sure there were some other political things going on, but that was the reason that I was given. And I was so shocked at that. And then when I started teaching, you know, I had lots, because I was in London, I had lots of different cultures coming in, and I realized that I had to adapt my approach. In the beginning, this is interesting. In the beginning, I would adapt my approach and become what I would say was a little bit more low context. And then as I got more expertise and had better reputation, and people came to me because, you know, they felt like I was able to give them what they needed, I noticed that I started to slip back more into my high context approach, because I felt more confident, you know.
Oh yeah.
So, well, that's why you're here, is because I'm going to help you and give you what you need, and this is the way I deliver it. And I might even say that to somebody. It's like, this is the way I tend to communicate. Are you going to be okay with that? And if not, please let me know. So that's probably how I deal with it now, if I was working with someone who I thought might misinterpret.
So you openly state your way of communicating, and see if the other person, how they feel.
Yeah. Though still the errors can occur, because I've definitely been in situations where the person has said, absolutely fine, bring it on. And then when you do, they get really upset and don't come back. But I've also realised as I've gone along, and this is why I'm working in the mindset side of things, is that actually our beliefs, our core beliefs, and some of them are quite limiting beliefs, will also cause us to interpret communication in different ways. You know, I can remember once somebody telling me that they thought that maybe our friendship wasn't as good as they thought it was, because they'd seen me talking to somebody with my hands like that, and obviously they had concluded I was talking about them. And that is like, anyone who knows me will know that I don't, that's not the way I communicate. And probably when I went like this, I was hiding that I was cursing about something, you know, random. It would never have been about this person. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So my gestures are being constantly interpreted, you know, and luckily I was at a stage in my mindset development, where I realized it had nothing to do with me and something to do with the way she interpreted that action. And that's something which I know if I'd been younger, it would have split the relationship up, the friendship.
What would you tell young Lynn in her 20s about connecting?
Deal with those limiting beliefs first.
How do you identify them even when you're 20?
Well, I think you need to, first of all, recognize that there's a possibility you have them, and they start pretty much, from 0 through to 7. And then find someone who can guide you through it, someone who's trained in helping eliminate limiting beliefs. That's what I wonder what kind of life or what kind of world this would be if people were able to deal with their limiting beliefs from a young age. Because I feel that many of the types of communication, the actions also that occur come out of somebody's limiting beliefs, whether it's, you snap and you get angry, or you get shy and you withdraw, or you make a joke out of it, or you need to be needy. All of that stuff is totally driven by your beliefs. That's the work I'm doing now. I'm working with somebody at the moment who had real problems in his own business because he kept thinking everybody was going to leave him. And it made him very clingy and also very suspicious whenever anybody did certain things. And it caused him to ruminate, for nights and lose sleep. But now that he doesn't have the limiting belief that drives that, he's able to form much better relationships, not just at work, but also outside of work. And he's come up with an even better idea of like, well, yes, people might leave, but let them leave into something that's mine. And so he's thinking about creating a franchise out of what he does, so that if someone leaves, they've got a way of leaving, but still taking what he does and his business benefits. So that was really interesting, but it was a limiting belief that he acquired from a very tragic loss when he was a child, which seemingly, if I had said to him, your behavior at work and in your relationships is as a result of this tragedy that you experienced, he would have just gone, no, how can that be, related? So I feel very firmly that if I had the opportunity to talk to my 20-year-old self, that's what I'd tell her.
Would she listen?
I think she would. Yeah. I think if and that's about communication as well. If I introduced it in the right way, I think she might consider it. Yeah.
How has the way that you have connected changed or evolved from your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s?
Oh, a lot. I mean, look, I acknowledge that, when we're children and teenagers and even up to sort of our mid-20s, we're very driven by our cognitive development and our hormones, that has a huge impact on our behaviour and our reactions. And maybe it isn't until our late 20s that we can really start doing the work. I don't know, maybe. I'm not an expert in that side of things, but when I was in my 20s, I just assumed that I wasn't accepted because my limiting belief was that I wasn't acceptable and this is tied into being mixed race and growing up in a country that had an all-white Australia policy, and sitting at a bus stop which said Asians out, which in Australia is talking about Chinese, Japanese, Southeast Asian, and trying constantly to hide that aspect of me, which wasn't really possible when I was younger because I did look a lot more Chinese. But I was driven by the belief that I didn't fit in and that I wasn't acceptable. And so the way I didn't communicate. So I would not say anything, and I'd be shy, and that
Mm.
was interpreted as me being distant and cold. Interestingly enough, people who then got to know me later down the track would tell me that. In my 30s, I felt more confident, but I was still exploring who I was. Definitely when I hit my 50s, I can remember thinking, oh, well, I'm here now. What are you going to do about it? And then, it's sort of from that, it's been a lot easier to feel confident about sticking to my guns or standing out. But then I've also coincidentally done a lot of work in my 50s as well. That's kind of when my real work started, was my late 40s, early 50s, of eliminating the beliefs. So I don't know if there was maybe that those things had an influence. But I
But
knew I didn't want to go into the rest of my life with those limiting beliefs and holding me
how,
back.
how did you know that the limiting beliefs were holding you back?
Well, it started with my business and knowing that my business could be better, but not having the belief that I could achieve it. And
Mm.
because I was already working on mindset strategies with my clients, like performing clients, I was like, okay, well, if they've got it, then I've probably got some things too. So why not explore it? And I have a tendency to experiment on myself first before I introduce it to my clients. So I then went and discovered Lefko belief process, which was the first time that I fully understood what a limiting belief was and the fact that one could eliminate them. And
Can you
so,
talk a little bit more about that?
yeah, so Morty Lefko,
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, unfortunately, he's passed away now. He realized that we were being driven by these limiting beliefs and that there could be a process in which to eliminate them. So he developed this process and then taught others how to do it. And you can still go to his website and do one of his limiting belief eliminations. So one of the most common ones is, I'm not good enough.
Mm.
That's something I work with all the time. And when I was thinking about my business and trying to make it into, what I wanted, I realized that I didn't believe that I had the ability to, but I couldn't find any facts to support
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And so I started working on those beliefs and started to notice that I would, so I had big business ideas, but I wouldn't action them. And then I noticed that I started to action them. And the other thing, of course, as a business and entrepreneurial type person, you need to network a lot more. And I can remember going to networking events, knowing that they're important, and then walking up down the road and then turning around and going back on the train or the underground back. This is when I was living in London. Like,
Mm.
I can't cope. I can't do this. I can't just go and talk to strangers. I can't talk about my business or me, or
Mm.
I'm embarrassed and they're going to think I'm weird, or they're not going to accept me.
Do
So
you
I remember,
remember what was holding you back?
yeah, then it was I'm not good enough, or people will laugh at me.
Mm.
What I want isn't available. I'll fail. I'm not capable. I would say that I've probably eliminated, I don't know, I've written down 140, but I will have eliminated a lot more than that,
Mm.
200 if not more. And I'm constantly eliminating because I'm much better at it now, at recognizing when it's a limiting belief that's causing the issue. I'm much quicker at eliminating them now than I was in the beginning. Yeah, but it affected my ability to do what needs to be done.
So, for a person that's listening to us that is at that stage that you were then, what's the first thing that you suggest? Where do they start?
Start by asking yourself, what are my thoughts? And write them down. What are my thoughts about whether I can or can't do this, or how people will perceive me? or not. And then you can start by challenging those, like, where is the proof in the world that you're not good enough? And you'll come up with answers, by the way, but there will always be an interpretation that you've made. So you might come up with the answer of like, well, my mum and dad never told me I was good enough. And that's now your evidence. It's like, okay, just because someone says that you're not, does that actually mean that you're not? It might be in their eyes, or it might be that they just never thought to tell you were good enough. They didn't think that they needed to because they thought you just knew that you were because you were their child. Or maybe they thought this is the best way to teach you to become good enough. That definitely, my mother was a very critical, that was how she brought me up, was through criticism, because she wanted to correct me all the time, but she forgot that I also needed, to be encouraged and complimented as well. I remember my dad telling me, well, when your mum doesn't say anything, we know it's good.
Wow.
And as a child, you can't make that differentiation. All you hear is the negative stuff. But it wasn't her intention to make me feel bad about myself or that I wasn't good enough. Her intention was always to make me the best that she thought I could be.
And do you remember the turning point where you described that you didn't have the confidence and you felt that you wouldn't be accepted by others in the business connections that you were afraid to make? What was the tipping point that you started to make those connections with confidence?
I think it was doing the work with Morty, yeah, and then doing the training with him and seeing it in other people. I mean, I could see changes in myself. And for some things, it was like, the light bulb, which was sort of flashing off, and other things were a little bit more gradual. Yeah, and I think that's, any of the work that you can do with mindset, there are going to be times when there's this sudden, whacks you in the face of like, aha moment. And there are other times when you'll be, going along in life, and then one day you'll find yourself doing something, you go, oh, I would never have done this 5 years ago or a year ago or whatever. And it's just sort of snuck up on you. Yeah. So I can't say there was any. I think when I started the work with Morty's process was when I realized, these things, these thoughts that I have, because I was a ruminator. So something would happen. Say, for instance, when I lost that job, it took me about 3 months to get over that. And I would think about it incessantly, replay it, talk about it with, my friends, to the point where they probably got sick of hearing about it. I got sick of thinking about it. I would lose sleep. I'd suddenly wake up going, oh, well, what have I done? Or maybe it was that person, or, it was such a time waster. I don't do those things anymore. If something happens and it doesn't work out the way I expect, I don't immediately assume it was me that caused that problem. I just go, oh, well, is there something I can do? Whether it is to help myself get through it, or whether it is to correct the miscommunication, or whether it is to change my direction, whatever it is. I just think of what's the solution here, rather than, the rumination and negative self-talk. Yeah, so I think definitely Morty's work helped open that as a possibility. And now I'm like, bring on those limiting beliefs, bring them on, because I need to get rid of them. I'm not living the rest of my life with those things. They are no longer relevant. They're not useful. And I relish finding them so I can get rid of them. Yeah, so that was definitely started with Morty's work.
And the older we get, it doesn't mean that we run out of limiting beliefs. It's a matter of what you're saying. You have a way of, and you're almost looking forward to discovering them and working with them.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that I think people need to recognize is that there's probably no one time when you'll be rid of all the limitations or blocks or whatever. It will constantly change as our circumstances change, as we age, as our health changes, as our job circumstances change. Like, for instance, I've been in between homes for the last sort of 8 months. I've never been in this situation before. And it's brought up all sorts of challenges that I've never had to face before because I've never been in this situation before.
But you have different tools of dealing with it now versus 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm very grateful to be born in this era, is that, first of all, because certainly it wasn't like that in really up until the 80s. First of all, it's much more acceptable, to go and get help, whether it's therapy or coaching or whatever it is. And secondly, there are a plethora of different strategies and tools and modalities out there that there's bound to be something that will suit you. So I always say to people, don't stop at just one option. Try different ones and see. Some may resonate better with you now, some may resonate later in life, some may never resonate, and that's fine. At least you have options. And it's not even the different modalities and therapies and strategies and tools, it's the different people. So you might find a tool or a strategy or a modality that really works for you, but maybe that person isn't a good fit. Well, nowadays, it's very likely there's other people who've also trained or, had education in that area or approach things in a similar way, but might be a better personal fit for you.
Yeah. And talking about connecting, and with the business that you have today, how do you connect and expand your reach?
Interesting, isn't it? Because it's so social media driven these days. I have stepped back a little bit from that recently, mainly because I'm working on another area of my business. And now I've got more free time. Well, it's not free time. I've got my time back because I was converting a live course into a online self-paced course, and that took 6 months to do. And I had to step back from social media because I just couldn't do everything. So I have been thinking about how do I want to reconnect with people moving forward. So I think what will probably will change is that I'm going to be connecting by sharing stories and talking about my stories and talking about my clients' stories, talking about stories that I've seen maybe, out there in the world of media. And that's how I shall be connecting. I want to make it as authentic as possible because I definitely don't want to feed into this false kind of idea about, everything's perfect and lovely and, looks great and sounds great and all that sort of thing. It's like, actually, it's not the real world. I have an aversion, even in the recording, music world, to the fact that everything's so perfect nowadays. Everything's dealt with in production. So you don't get a recording where somebody's sung the wrong note or sung the wrong words anymore. That's just not a possibility. And what that does is it leads those who are in the wake of all that to believe that the only way that the end product has to be is perfect. And so when I go out and perform, I have to be perfect. I have to be pitch perfect, lyric perfect. I have to be perfect in the way I look. And it's causing a lot of problems. And I
That's
feel
a
like
lot of pressure, isn't it?
it's a lot of pressure. And when you're young, you can't be, you might try to be perfect, but you'll never be perfect. And I feel like it's causing a lot of the anxiety that's out there in the world at the moment. So
Do
I
you
don't want to
wanna do you wanna share a personal story now
about.
about what you plan on sharing with your program in the future?
So one of the things that probably is a big part of my story, which I definitely pushed aside for a long time, is being mixed race
Mm.
and identity and not feeling like I fit in. And it wasn't specifically anyone's fault. It was just the way things were. And my parents brought me up. I was my mother's natural child, but not my stepfather's. But we acted, as if we were all one family. But it was very evident that I didn't look like the other. And so I feel like that informed a lot of my decisions in terms of the way that I communicated, the direction I took my career, even, and the way that I approached these things, including, relationships, maybe even, where I lived. I feel like I probably chose to leave Australia because it was easier to be an Australian in the UK than it was to be mixed race in Australia. And a lot of people would be probably quite shocked at that, people who know me, not realizing that this was underlying a lot of my decisions and drive. And so I'd like to talk about that because I think identity is important. And I wouldn't change anything. I just would like to have accepted myself a lot earlier.
So that's one of the messages that you would give to your younger self?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Because I realized for the first 30 years of my life, I was actually in denial of 50% of myself. And that's a lot of yourself to be denying and pretending doesn't exist. Or not liking. I mean, really not liking. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Lynn.
You're welcome.
And today has been an amazing conversation, and thank you for being so open and sharing your insights and your experiences. And a lot of the central sort of sphere around what you were sharing was around really identifying limiting beliefs and constantly working on them, getting over them, and seeing what else is coming up and working on that, and etc. So I gained a lot from today's conversation. Thank you. What was useful for you today, Lynn?
I think even just sharing that story, because I don't think I've really talked about it very much, about how being mixed race has determined my trajectory, good and bad. And also just recognizing how far I've come, like, because quite often I think when we're working on ourselves, we're just working from the point that we're at, don't we? We don't necessarily reflect back to see how far we've come. So it's been, I've appreciated having that opportunity to reflect on that and recognize the work that I've done. A little pat on the back, for having done the work. And it's very, it's a joyful feeling, actually. It feels exciting and fun and optimistic, which is something that I think we all need in our world. So thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for being on the channel. Thanks for being 007 today.
I shall have to go get my gin and tonic.
There you go. What is it? Stirred, not shaken? Or is it the other way around? I forget.
I think it's stirred, not shaken.
Next time, the conversation should be in Cyprus. So
sounds good.
Let's say whatever next episode number is going to be, when we renew this conversation, it should be in Cyprus. So you've been through most of the planet, so time to be in Cyprus as well.
Absolutely, yes, and it would be lovely to connect with you again.
Then thank you very much. I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching today's episode with Line Hilton. and thank you for your continued support. Go ahead and provide any comments that you may have, and we'll make sure to answer in a prompt manner. See you soon.